They laughed at his walls. Every alien on the excavation crew did. Tall, elegant beings from across the stars, most with brains wired more for calculation than survival, strutted past the crude metal and stone bunker he had carved into the canyon rock like it was a joke. Primitive insulation. Zero elegance, scoffed the Ikran foreman with his twin vocal sacs. Looks like a nest made by a starving insect. He didn't bother correcting them. He'd been through worse. He just adjusted the airflow regulator bolted to the thick steel door and went back to welding a third support beam into place. Desert winds were rising, and he knew exactly what that meant. The planet, officially named Zenth 7, but more commonly cursed as Hell's Throat, was a dried-out husk sitting at the edge of the Denari belt. No water, no trees, just jagged rock formations and storms that could grind armor to powder. Humans weren't even supposed to be here. The Denari Trade Council had declared the surface unsustainable for standard life forms after 10 colonists died in a week-long sandstorm 6 cycles back. But humans weren't standard. He'd volunteered after the first storm took out the off-world base camp. They needed a field engineer who understood rugged sustainability, whatever the hell that meant to the council. What they got instead was a former combat sapper named Reed, who had survived 2 planetary wars, an orbital crash, and a 6-month survival stint in the ruins of Ceta Prime. He didn't talk much. He worked. He built. He planned. And now, with dust devils the size of skyscrapers forming on the horizon, he was about to be proven right. The alien crew had camped outside, under glossy tech skin tents shaped like shimmering domes. They floated on magnetic repulsion coils and promised perfect temperature control. They looked sleek, futuristic, expensive, and about as durable as toilet paper in a hurricane. Reed gave them one last glance as he stepped into his shelter, sealed the bulkhead, and engaged the triple lock system. The wind was already shrieking across the canyon mouth, and the air smelled of iron and burnt rock. The sandstorm was coming. Not just a regular one either. This was the kind that killed moons. Reed settled onto the bunk he'd welded into the rock wall, a rifle slung over his shoulder and a battered flask of old Terran bourbon in his hand. The lights dimmed to red. He sipped slow, calm. He knew they wouldn't come asking for help. Not yet. They were too proud, too sure their tech could outmatch nature. He gave them 2 hours, maybe less. It hit like a freight train from hell. The first wave came with no warning, just a violent shriek that made the entire canyon vibrate. Reed's shelter groaned but didn't budge. The steel held. The supports dug deep. Outside he could hear it. Cracking. Screaming. The tech tents had ripped like silk under a blade. That fancy shielding? Worthless. Wind and sand slashed through them like knives, and those magnetic coils, they scattered like cheap toys. He could hear them now, voices raised in panic, muffled through the thick metal. He waited. Another explosion. A support tower from their supply zone buckled, sent crashing into the ridge. Debris howled like banshees through the wind. He didn't feel good about it, but he didn't feel bad either. They'd called his shelter worthless. They'd laughed. Now they were bleeding and crawling towards the one thing on this planet that wouldn't collapse under pressure. His door buzzed. A high-pitched emergency frequency. Then another. Then 6 more, overlapping. He stood, walked to the console, took a breath. Then he flipped the comm switch and said just 4 words. "You still think so?" The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got angrier. The wind punched the canyon with fists of sand that could rip flesh from bone. Outside, the world had become a death trap of blinding grit and fury. Inside, the shelter was holding. barely making a sound except for the occasional low hum of strain against the reinforced supports. Reed stood in the middle of the small chamber, still as a statue. He'd built this place for one purpose, to survive what others called unsurvivable. And now the very aliens who mocked him were begging to be let in. Again, the emergency comm buzzed. 7 separate signatures, overlapping. It was chaos out there. Emergency, shelter request, hostile atmospheric breach. Multiple injuries, requesting immediate. Please respond. Atrak's unconscious and... He exhaled through his nose. They were panicking. Good. Maybe next time they'd think twice before mocking what they didn't understand. But Reed wasn't cruel. He didn't let people die if he could help it. That was one of the few things he hadn't let war take from him. He slammed the lock release, and the thick steel door hissed open. The wind shrieked like a dying beast, and within seconds the chamber was peppered with sharp grains of sand. A pressure shield kicked in automatically, holding most of it back, but the fury of the storm still slammed against the threshold like a living thing. Then came the shadows. 5 of them at first, staggering, covered in what was left of their silver gear, now shredded and burned from exposure. Their alien features were wild with desperation, skin blistered, clothing in tatters, eyes filled with disbelief. They didn't speak, just stumbled inside, gasping, coughing, bleeding. Reed grabbed the first one by the shoulder, an Atroxy technician, barely 5 feet 5 inches in height, with feathered gill-like ridges across his neck, and shoved him toward the corner. Back. Sit. Don't lean on the wall. Another followed, dragging someone behind them. Reed caught the limp body. It was the Ikran foreman, the same arrogant bastard who'd ridiculed the shelter's ugly build. His skin was cracked, his right eye swollen shut. He's fading, the alien dragging him rasped. Do something. I'm not a damn medic, Reed muttered, but pulled open a medkit anyway and started injecting a stabilizer into the foreman's upper chest. 3 more came crawling in, including one massive Gorali whose thick carapace armor was now fractured and oozing green fluid. Behind them, the storm roared with renewed rage, as if angry they'd found safety. Reed slammed the door shut. The lock hissed back into place, sealing them inside the crude bunker. Silence followed, the kind that presses into your bones. The aliens collapsed in the corners of the chamber, coughing, shivering, bleeding. No one said anything for a while. Then one of them, a tall, skeletal alien with red, reflective eyes, looked around and muttered in disbelief, "It's warm in here." Reed didn't answer. He didn't need to. Half an hour passed. Reed moved around the chamber, checking temperature gauges, airflow, pressure valves. He barely acknowledged the aliens huddled on the floor. A couple of them whispered among themselves in their native dialects, eyeing him like a strange predator. "I didn't think you built this alone," one finally said. Reed was crouched near a vent, tightening a filter bolt. He grunted without turning. "I did. No assistance? No labor drones? I had a shovel, a welder, and my hands." The alien was silent. Another one, the younger Atroxy technician who'd been the first through the door, spoke up next. "You anticipated this storm?" Reed chuckled. "Number, I knew it was coming. Just didn't know when." The technician looked like he wanted to argue, but then lowered his gaze. He'd seen the result. The high-tech tents, the towers, all shredded like paper. Another voice, low and bitter, broke through. It was the Ikran foreman, now conscious and lying against a makeshift cot Reed had set up from scrap and canvas. His eye was still swollen shut, but his good one burned with shame. You were right, he rasped. We laughed at you. Reed didn't stop working. You did. I said your shelter was garbage. You did. The Ikran was quiet for a moment. Then, we almost died. Reed stood and turned to face him, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. His stare was calm, but cold. Yeah, you did. No more words were exchanged for a while, just the sound of breathing. The storm continued outside, pounding like a god trying to break through. Hours passed. Inside the shelter, the mood shifted. The aliens stopped whispering. Some started watching Reed with quiet intensity as he worked, noting how he moved, how he maintained every system manually. No auto-calibration, no voice-activated adjustments, just hard-wired survival. You built redundancy, the Atroxy whispered, tracing a wire along the wall. Triple backup ventilation, dual power cores, analog override systems. Reed nodded. That's not standard engineering. Reed looked at him and shrugged. Standard engineering gets you killed out here. The younger alien frowned. Why would you go to so much effort alone? Was this for profit? Reed didn't answer at first. He stood near the heat regulator, staring at the thick steel wall. Because I've watched too many people die under pretty tech that couldn't handle the real world. They were listening now, all of them. I've seen domes melt, tents disintegrate, people trusting equipment that was made for show, not survival. I stopped trusting anyone's systems but my own. A silence settled over the group. Then Reed added, quieter now. Out here, if it ain't ugly, it ain't gonna last. Later that night, the food came out. Simple ration packs, salted protein, dehydrated carbs, vitamin pellets. The aliens looked at them like they were animal feed. Reed tossed a few towards the group. Eat it or don't, doesn't matter to me. The younger Atroxy sniffed his, then reluctantly chewed a chunk. His expression turned from doubt to awe. This tastes like meat. It is meat, Reed said flatly. Real, not synthesized. No nutrient wash? No lab-grown slurry? Reed smirked. You're in a human shelter now. Welcome to dirt and blood. Some of them laughed. For the first time. It wasn't much, but it cracked the tension. As the storm continued to howl into the next day, one of the aliens, a quiet female from a reptilian race Reed didn't recognize, finally asked the question no one else would. Why do humans keep surviving? Things no one else can? Reed looked at her, then around the room. Then he sat down. Finally, he spoke. Because we never had a choice. They waited. Earth was never kind. We evolved under a sky that tried to kill us every season. We didn't get paradise. We got hell with gravity, disease, war, droughts, predators. Our history is one long chain of people refusing to die. He leaned back against the wall. We didn't build things to look pretty. We built them to outlast the things that wanted us dead. The shelter creaked again under the weight of the storm. That's why we survive, Reed said, because when everything else folds, humans dig in and wait it out. No one argued. No one laughed. Near the end of the second day, the storm showed signs of dying. The pressure outside dropped. The wind began to retreat, though it still hissed like a wounded monster across the canyon walls. Reed stood by the door again, watching the warning sensors blink from red to amber. It was almost over. He looked back at the group. 8 aliens who had come in mocking him, and now looked at him with something else in their eyes. Not pity, not superiority, but respect. The Ikran foreman limped over, leaning against the wall for support. His voice was hoarse. I owe you a life debt. Reed said nothing. I can't return it today, but I will. Reed nodded. Don't die before you do. The alien blinked, then gave the faintest smile. You humans are strange. Reed chuckled. You have no idea. When the door finally opened again, the canyon outside looked like a war zone. Every alien structure was gone, flattened or blown halfway across the ridge. Supply crates scattered like children's toys. Equipment melted. Tents shredded. But the shelter stood, the only thing that had made it through the storm. And now everyone knew it. The storm had passed, but the real problems were only just beginning. Reed stood at the threshold of the shelter, squinting into the haze. Dust still lingered in the air, thick enough to taste. The canyon looked like it had been hit with a thermal bomb. What little vegetation had clung to the rocks was gone, scorched by wind friction. Equipment lay twisted and broken, parts embedded deep into rock from the sheer force of impact. The entire base camp was flattened. Behind him, the aliens moved slowly, cautiously stepping into the sunlight, as if unsure it was real. No one said anything for a while. The destruction spoke for itself. The Ikran foreman, his right arm now in a makeshift sling, stepped up beside Reed. We'll need weeks to recover, possibly longer. Reed didn't look at him. That's if your command doesn't scrap the operation completely. The foreman didn't reply. He didn't have to. Everyone knew the truth. This was a disaster. A project that had burned through millions of credits and had almost cost 12 lives. And the only thing still standing was Reed's ugly, outdated human-built shelter. 2 hours later, a rescue ship from orbit descended on the canyon. The shuttle kicked up another storm of dust as it touched down, its polished hull looking absurdly clean compared to the wreckage surrounding it. The ship bore the crest of the Denari Trade Council, the same bureaucratic entity that had claimed humans were too chaotic for frontier engineering contracts. Now, a group of neatly dressed inspectors stepped onto the planet with perfect breathing masks and spotless boots. Reed watched them from a distance as they walked around the ruins, scanning, muttering, and occasionally glancing toward the shelter. One of them, tall, smug, dressed in navy blue synth fiber, finally approached. You are the human engineer assigned here, Reed, correct? That's me. The man didn't offer his hand. Instead, he tapped something on his datapad and frowned. I see you ignored the approved shelter design package provided by Denari Engineering. I built what would survive, Reed said flatly. You used non-standard materials, analog systems, no modular backups. And yet I'm alive, Reed said, crossing his arms. And so are the rest of them, thanks to what you just called non-standard. The inspector didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened. You may have violated several construction codes. Reed stepped forward, just a bit. And you may have gotten them killed with your fragile prefab domes and pretty little tents. Let's not pretend we're both wrong here. The alien crew watched the exchange from a distance. No one intervened. No one defended the inspector. Because Reed was right. And everyone knew it. Later, in the ruins of the old command tent, an emergency debriefing was called. The Ikran foreman, 2 surviving team leads, and Reed sat in a half-burnt circle while the inspector's holotable projected scrolling logs of the damage. Total loss of equipment, 82% destruction of Phase 1 structures, atmospheric containment units ruptured, communications tower dismantled by storm impact. The inspector's tone was cold, robotic. This is a failure of catastrophic proportions. Reed leaned forward. This is a failure of arrogance. All eyes turned to him. You came to a planet known for having the worst atmospheric conditions in the sector. You ignored the warnings. You brought comfort tech, not survival tech. You laughed at a bunker that's still standing. The inspector narrowed his eyes. You think one shelter justifies breaking protocol? No, Reed said slowly. I think one shelter proves protocol isn't worth a damn when your lungs are full of glass and your command tent is halfway up a mountain. Silence. Then the Ikran foreman, still weak, still bandaged, spoke up. The human saved us. His shelter wasn't approved, but it worked. Better than anything else we had. If it wasn't for him, I'd be dead. We all would. One by one, the aliens around the circle nodded. Reed didn't gloat. He just stared at the inspector like he was waiting for him to blink first. And eventually, he did. That night, Reed sat outside the shelter again. The wind had died down to a whisper. The stars were out, bright, sharp, hundreds of them. The kind of view you could only get on a planet no one wanted to live on. He took a sip from his flask and let the silence wrap around him. It wasn't peaceful. Not quite. There was tension in it. The kind that comes after a storm, when you're not sure if it's really over or just regrouping. Footsteps crunched behind him. The Atroxy technician sat down beside him, careful not to touch the edge of the cliff. His gill-like neck ridges fluttered in the dry air. You were a soldier once, the alien said. Not a question. Reed nodded. What kind? Explosives, fortifications, combat engineering? The alien looked at the shelter. Makes sense. He hesitated, then added, I studied at the Senkai Institute. Best engineering school in my sector. Top of my class. I built reactors for orbital colonies. I designed fusion bridges. But I never saw anyone build with their hands. Reed took another sip. You ever see one of your bridges survive a sandstorm like that? The alien chuckled, embarrassed. No. You learned how to build in theory. I learned how to build while people screamed and died around me. There's a difference. Another silence, not awkward, just heavy. Then the alien said, You're not just a survivor, you're a builder of last resorts. Reed liked that. He didn't say it out loud, but he liked it. 2 days later, a new command team arrived from orbit. No polished boots this time. These people looked like they'd seen a few storms of their own. They wore reinforced gear, talked in clipped military accents, and treated Reed's shelter like a holy site. The new lead, an older, scarred Gaelran woman with a voice like gravel, walked into the shelter, looked around once and said, Whoever built this, I want 5 more just like it, now. Reed raised an eyebrow. You sure? It's not pretty. Pretty is for gravestones, she said. We're here to survive. For the first time since he arrived on this God-forsaken rock, Reed smiled. Over the next week, he found himself in an unfamiliar position, in charge. The very aliens who mocked him now came to him for guidance. The Ikran foreman deferred to him. The Atroxy followed his blueprints. Even the bureaucrats who remained did so quietly, with eyes averted. Reed didn't gloat. He didn't even talk much. He just worked. He showed them how to dig into the rock for stability, how to weld supports with double reinforcement, how to use analog circuits to bypass electronic failure during storms. He made them get their hands dirty. And for the first time, he saw something shift in their eyes. Not pity, not superiority. Respect. But not everyone was happy. Some of the bureaucrats still lingered around the edges, watching with narrowed eyes. They didn't like how fast Reed's authority grew. They didn't like how a primitive human suddenly became the backbone of their operation. One evening, the inspector returned with a datapad full of concerns. Your structures are efficient, he admitted, but they're becoming too influential. You're not here to lead, Mr. Reed. You're here to assist. Reed looked at him. Cold, tired, done with games. I've got 12 people alive because of my work, and 4 new shelters almost done. You think that's just assisting? You're a contractor, not a commander. Reed stepped forward. You want command? Fine. Step outside and survive the next storm in one of your tents. If you make it back, I'll follow your lead. The inspector turned pale. Reed didn't smile. He didn't need to. Some lessons don't come through debate. They come through survival. That night, the Atroxy technician brought him a hand-drawn schematic. I adapted your design, he said. Added a filtration core and reinforced the thermal layer, but the bones are yours. Reed looked it over. It was good. Damn good. You understand now, Reed said. The technician nodded. You don't build for comfort. You build for when the universe wants you dead. Reed handed the schematic back. Then you're finally building like a human. The sun was still rising when Reed knew something was off. He sat outside the 3rd completed shelter, sharpening a carbon blade on a flat piece of stone. Around him, the new crew worked in silence. Less chaos now, more structure. The alien engineers took notes. They followed his build orders without protest. Even the Atroxy had begun implementing hybrid systems, blending his analog backbone with their plasma tech. But something didn't feel right. It was in the air. Not the temperature, no. That was still its usual blistering dry. It was the silence, the kind that pressed down, that hovered over everything like a warning. Reed stood, scanning the horizon. Nothing but jagged stone ridges and haze. But his gut told him someone was watching. By noon, the first sign came. The emergency pressure valve on Shelter 2, perfectly secured the night before, suddenly vented CO2. Loud, violent. It shouldn't have. Reed ran diagnostics. Manual overrides showed the valve had been physically tampered with. Someone had cut the backup lock and loosened the primary seal. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't storm damage. It was sabotage. Reed didn't tell the crew. Not yet. He reset the valve, sealed it, then marked it manually in his private log. The next problem came 2 hours later. Shelter 1's power bank was drawing double its usual load. When Reed checked the inner wiring, he found 2 of the thermal regulators had been crossed, intentionally reversed. If it had continued unnoticed, the shelter would have caught fire under internal pressure. He fixed it in silence. But now his jaw was clenched. His grip on the tools had turned white-knuckled. They weren't dealing with storms anymore. Someone here wanted him gone, or worse, wanted him discredited. He called a meeting after dusk. No warning, no polite request. Just a booming voice over the canyon loudspeakers. All build crew, foreman, tech leads, report to Shelter Alpha. Now. Within 20 minutes, they stood inside the original bunker, the one that had saved them all. Some still smelled of welding fumes and coolant. A few looked annoyed. But no one refused him now, not after what they'd seen him do. Reed stepped into the center of the room and didn't waste time. There's been sabotage. That word hit like a dropped hammer. Eyes darted, some gasped, others just stared, waiting. 2 separate tamper jobs in one day. One could have suffocated a crew, the other might have burned a shelter down from the inside. He looked at the Ikran foreman. You inspected the last 2 builds yourself, didn't you? The alien nodded slowly. I did, and I can confirm. Everything was locked. No mechanical failure would explain what happened. Reed turned to the group. That means someone here wants this to fail. A silence stretched long and ugly. Why? Someone finally asked. We're building faster than expected. The shelters work. There's no reason. There's always a reason, Reed interrupted. Power, credit, control. Someone up the food chain doesn't like that a human contractor is being treated like a lead engineer. One of the Atroxy, older, thin, always quiet, folded his arms. You're saying someone from Denari Command wants you out? I'm saying they didn't want me in to begin with. He let that sit. They laughed at what I built. Now I'm the only reason this camp hasn't been written off as a total loss. That makes some people nervous. The Ikran's voice dropped low. If there's sabotage, there could be worse things coming. Reed nodded. I agree, which is why I'm putting every shelter on lockdown. More murmurs. Manual overrides only. No remote access, no auto-timers. If you want in or out, you'll be doing it the way I built it. Slow, mechanical, and personal. That's inefficient, one tech grumbled. It's safe, Reed snapped. And safety comes before speed. Or do you want to die warm and fast in a burned-out coffin? No one answered. The point had been made. 3 nights later, the saboteur finally made their move. It happened after midnight. Reed was inside Shelter Alpha, half asleep, when the emergency beacon for Shelter 4 started blinking. No sound, just a silent, red strobe that meant a core power disruption. He was up in seconds. Boots on, rifle slung across his back. He crossed the canyon in minutes, wind biting. The ridge shadows long and strange. When he reached Shelter 4, everything was dark. No interior lights, no ambient hum from the generator. He drew his flashlight, weapon in his other hand. The door wasn't forced. It was opened. Clean. Too clean. Someone had bypassed the new locks. He stepped inside, sweeping the beam around the entryway. Dust. Silence. The faint smell of melted copper. And then he saw it. The power core had been removed. Not destroyed, not damaged, stolen. That meant it wasn't just sabotage, it was a power play. He returned to Alpha and triggered lockdown across the entire canyon site. Gates slammed shut. Automated checkpoints froze. The comms lit up within seconds. What's going on? Is this another storm? Reed, talk to us. He didn't answer. He didn't have time. Whoever had stolen the core couldn't have gotten far. The core was heavy, nearly 80 kilos. It required a grav cart or some serious muscle. Reed began checking storage logs. There were only 3 places with magnetic shielding strong enough to hide a power core. The comms tower ruins, the old dig site caves, and the mobile transport units at the edge of the cliff. The first 2 were locked or collapsed. That left the third. He grabbed a tracker beacon, locked his gear, and set out into the night. The mobile unit sat on the ridge's edge, metal boxes with hover treads, meant to carry mineral samples and light construction tools. Only one had been unsealed recently. Reed found the tire marks in the dust. He followed them, down a slope, across a shallow, dry trench, to the base of a craggy outcrop that jutted from the canyon like a blade. There, half buried behind stacked mineral crates, he found the stolen core. And beside it, the inspector, the same polished synthetic bastard who'd told him he was just a contractor. Except now his suit was dusty, his hands trembling as he held a plasma cutter, pointed right at Reed. You shouldn't have come here, the inspector said. His voice was high, thin, weak. Reed didn't flinch. I figured it was you. Bureaucrats don't like being shown up. You were supposed to fail, the man spat. That shelter was supposed to collapse. They were going to revoke all human build contracts across the sector. You were a token experiment. That's it. Reed took a step forward. The cutter hummed louder. I said stay back. You think that thing scares me? Reed growled. You've never held a real weapon in your life. That plasma cutter's gonna melt through the core before you even lift your hand. The inspector's hand twitched. Why? Reed asked. Why try to kill the crew? Sabotage the shelter? I wasn't trying to kill them, the inspector snapped. I was trying to prove your systems were unreliable, that your primitive construction methods were a liability. Reed's eyes narrowed. So you tampered with the only tech that actually worked. The man hesitated. Reed lunged. In one smooth motion, he knocked the cutter aside, grabbed the man's arm, twisted, and slammed him into the dirt. The fight was over in seconds. The inspector wheezed, coughing, blood on his lip. You don't get it. You humans always brute force. No elegance, no diplomacy. Reed leaned down, eyes full of fire. No bullshit either. By dawn, the inspector was bound, silent, and sitting inside a secure cell inside Shelter Alpha. The power core had been reinstalled. Systems were stable. The sabotage had been neutralized. And the truth was known. Reed made a full report. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't hold back. The inspector had deliberately sabotaged Denari property, risked lives, committed criminal negligence, all to preserve a political agenda. When the orbital tribunal heard the evidence, there was only one decision to make. The inspector was stripped of rank and detained indefinitely. But Reed was offered command of the entire engineering division on Zenth 7. He turned it down. Later, standing outside the shelter with dust in his beard and a half-finished circuit board in his hand, the Atroxy approached him again. You could have taken over, the alien said. Led the entire operation. Reed shrugged. Not interested in titles? Then what are you interested in? Reed looked out across the canyon. The shelters, the new builds, the dirt, the scars on his knuckles. Things that don't fall down when the wind screams. It started with a signal. At first, just interference. A rhythmic pulse that messed with the comm arrays and spiked the motion sensors across the camp. The techs thought it was an echo from the storm, maybe a magnetized mineral deposit reacting to solar flares. But Reed knew better. He was working on a pressure seal upgrade when the interference hit again. Short, deliberate. He stood up, staring at the console like it had insulted him. That's a pattern, he muttered. The Atroxy technician, now his unofficial second-in-command, turned to him. You think it's a transmission? Reed nodded. Not human. Not from the Council either. Then who? Reed didn't answer. Instead, he walked outside the shelter, eyes fixed on the northern ridge, the one no one ever built near. It wasn't superstition. It was protocol. Denari records had marked the entire northern sector as culturally protected, a vague and unexplained designation. When Reed first arrived, he'd ignored it, until he noticed how even the cockiest aliens refused to work within 5 kilometers of it. He'd figured it was just political red tape. Now he wasn't so sure. By nightfall, the pulse had grown stronger. It interfered with light panels, droned through headsets like a heartbeat. And then, just past midnight, the first drone spotted movement. Figures on the northern ridge. Dozens of them. Tall, thin, no visible heat signature. They didn't speak. They just stood, cloaked in black robes like shadows etched into the dust. When the drone descended for a closer look, the feed cut to static. In the morning, the message arrived. Not a data ping. Not a signal. A body. It was left at the canyon's edge. One of the salvage crew, eyes wide open, throat slit with surgical precision. No blood spilled. His corpse was placed in a kneeling position facing the shelter. A crude symbol had been carved into his chest. Not a word. Not a demand. Just a warning. Reed stood over the body while the wind kicked up dust around him. The shelter crew stood behind him, silent, shaken. We're not dealing with scavengers, the Ikran foreman said quietly. No, Reed muttered. We're dealing with locals. By noon, a full council alert was issued. Turns out Denari knew about them all along. The planet wasn't uninhabited. It had once been the center of a nomadic alien race, known only in the records as the Relic, wiped out, or so everyone thought, during the early colonization wars centuries ago. But they weren't gone. They'd just gone underground, literally, living beneath the surface in massive caverns untouched by machines or radar. They had their own laws, their own territories, and according to an old, nearly forgotten agreement from 3 administrations ago, Zenth 7 was legally theirs. Denari had buried that clause when they sold the contract rights. Now the Relic were back, and they didn't care who had paperwork. That night, Reed attended the emergency council in Shelter Alpha. The crew was packed into the common room: Atroxy, Ikran, Gorali, humans. They all looked the same under stress, nervous and cornered. One of the council's legal agents, now connected by relay from orbit, appeared in holographic form, panicked and sweating. "We are currently in violation of Clause 39 Alpha of the pre-colonial treaty. The Relic have the legal right to demand immediate evacuation." Reed frowned. "We saved this site. We survived storms, sabotage, and near collapse. You're telling me we're supposed to just leave because someone found a dusty document?" "It's not up for debate," the agent snapped. "You must evacuate all structures within 72 hours. The Relic representatives have made it clear. If we don't, they will consider it an act of invasion." The room went still. The Ikran foreman's face darkened. "They murdered one of our crew. You're telling us to surrender?" The agent looked around nervously, then cut the feed. Reed didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low but steady. "We're not leaving." Eyes turned to him. The Atroxy looked anxious. "Reed, if we stay..." "They'll kill more of us," someone else whispered. Reed turned to the crew. "We've got shelters, strong ones. We've got supplies, weapons, backup systems, and we've already survived worse." The Gorali Enforcer, one of the newer build security team, growled low. "This isn't a storm. This is war." Reed looked him dead in the eye. "Storm, war, doesn't matter. The shelter holds." "But they outnumber us." "Not here, not on this terrain." Reed turned toward the reinforced blast door. "I built this place for the worst the planet could throw at us. Turns out that includes its ghosts." He drew a line in the dirt with his boot. "We hold, or we die with our backs against steel." The attack came 2 nights later. No warning, no fanfare, just a flicker of the outer motion sensors, and then silence. No wind, no howling. The air felt tight, like the world itself had stopped breathing. Then the first explosion. One of the unfinished outer shelters went up in fire and dust. Shrapnel screamed across the canyon floor. Screams followed. Sirens, weapons fire. Reed was already on his feet, issuing orders through gritted teeth. "Lock down Shelter Alpha. Bring everyone inside. Defensive positions now." The Relic didn't fire energy weapons. They used compressed kinetic rods, silent, deadly projectiles that moved faster than sound. One of them hit the cliff near Alpha's entrance, shattering rock, gouging a crater 1/2 meter deep. But the shelter held. Its walls flexed, absorbed the blast, didn't crack. Inside, Reed moved through the chaos like a ghost, checking seals, bolting blast doors, handing out old Terran rifles with manual triggers. "This is it," he shouted. "This is what we built for." Outside, shadows moved like liquid death, tall, fast, almost invisible in the night. The Relic didn't storm the shelter directly. They circled, cut off retreat, tried to starve them out. But Reed had planned for that too. He hit the switch that collapsed the outer ridge entrance, a backup plan no one else even knew existed. The tunnel sealed behind rock and steel. They were now inside, trapped, together. Exactly how Reed wanted it. Inside the shelter, the crew braced for the breach. The Relic began drilling through the wall, slow, methodical, like they'd done it 1,000 times. Reed stood near the vent shafts, watching the pressure readings. The wall would hold for a while, but not forever. "We give them one corridor," he told the crew. "One path. Make them think they're breaching. Then we light the kill zone." The Atroxy paled. "You want to funnel them in?" "We don't win with numbers. We win with structure, with planning. We turn this shelter into a trap." And they did. Reed guided them through it like a conductor, rewiring air vents to pump flammable gas, placing backup cores near key supports for emergency overcharges, turning even the ceiling fans into weapons. When the breach finally came, the relic surged forward, silent and fast, and then Reed detonated the first wall. Gas ignited. Metal shrieked. Dozens of shadows burned alive in a blast of pressurized fire. The rest froze, hesitated. That was their mistake. Reed and the crew poured bullets, plasma bolts, and improvised explosives into the kill zone. The shelter became a furnace of sound and light, and when the smoke cleared, the relic retreated. When dawn finally broke, the canyon was quiet again. Bodies littered the rock. Not human. Relic. They had underestimated the primitive shelter. The human who built it. The crew who defended it. The structure they once called worthless had become their grave. Reed stood at the entrance, blood on his arms, dirt on his face, and a cigarette between his teeth. The Atroxy stepped beside him. "What now?" Reed exhaled smoke. "Now they know. This world isn't theirs anymore." The battlefield was quiet now, but the tension hadn't gone anywhere. Ash still clung to the rocks around Shelter Alpha. Broken weapons, cracked armor plates, and the twisted remains of relic invaders littered the canyon like a warning. The sun was sharp overhead, blinding and hot, but Reed didn't squint. He stood on the ridge in full gear, staring out toward the northern ridge where the relic had vanished days earlier. They'd retreated after the slaughter, but not far. They hadn't left. And now, they wanted him. The message came at dawn, carved into stone and left outside the collapsed tunnel like a ceremonial offering. The script wasn't in Denari standard, but the crew decoded it fast enough. Even the Atroxy paled when he finished reading. The one who commands the shelters will face the relic war chief, alone. Trial of blood and dust. If he wins, he claims the canyon. If he dies, the land returns to us. One life for dominion. Reed stared at the message in silence. Then he just said, "Fine." They tried to talk him out of it. The Ikran foreman, his arms still healing from the last battle, stood in the doorway of Shelter Alpha and growled. "This is a trap. You think they'll keep their word if you win?" Reed was strapping on his boots, calm, focused, not in the mood for debate. "I think they already know they can't win against the shelter," he said. "So they're trying something older, something simpler." The Atroxy chimed in, nervous. "This trial, we've heard of it. Ritual combat, yes, but not symbolic. It's to the death. Brutal. No technology, no firearms." "Good," Reed muttered. "Then it's fair." "You're out of your mind." Reed looked up, eyes like stone. "This is how we end it. Not with more bodies. With one the relic sent a guide. He appeared at dusk, tall, robed, covered in black ash and intricate bone armor. His face was hidden, but his voice was deep and ancient. "No weapons," he said to Reed. "No armor. You bring only hands and your will. Do you accept?" "I've been accepting death my whole damn life," Reed answered. The alien nodded once. "Then follow." Reed didn't look back. They marched him across the broken ground of Zenth 7, far from the shelters, far from the crew, past ridges and caves, into territory no scanner had mapped. Finally, they reached a circle of jagged stones, scorched black and arranged in a perfect ring. In the center, a pit. No grand arena, no cheering crowd, just dirt, blood, and silence. Reed stepped in. Across from him, the relic war chief descended into the pit, 7 feet tall, skin like hammered metal, scarred arms, eyes that glowed dull amber like coals in a dying fire. He didn't speak, just removed his robe and stepped forward, barefoot, hands clenched. Reed stripped down to the basics. No shirt, no boots, just calloused fists and muscle built from war and survival. They circled each other once. Then the war chief lunged. The first blow knocked the wind out of Reed. He hit the dirt hard, rolled, came up bleeding from his lip. The relic didn't wait. Charged again, fist like a boulder, slamming into Reed's ribs. But Reed had been hit harder before. On Cedar Prime, he'd taken a beam shrapnel to the gut and still carried 2 soldiers out through gunfire. This question mark. This was personal. This was muscle versus will. He ducked the next punch, drove his elbow into the alien's kidney, if it had kidneys, and stepped back as the war chief hissed in surprise. Blood trickled from the alien's mouth, so he could bleed. Good. The fight went on for minutes that felt like years. The relic had strength, massive, bone-crushing power, but Reed had grit. He knew how to move, how to take pain and turn it into fuel. Every hit was a lesson. Every bruise was knowledge. He broke the war chief's nose with a clean headbutt. The alien responded by slamming Reed to the ground and nearly snapping his arm. They rolled in the dust, fists flying, both men soaked in sweat and blood. There were no rules, no pauses, just survival. At one point, Reed tasted copper and couldn't feel 2 of his fingers. His knee screamed every time he shifted weight. The relic's eye had swollen shut, and one of his hands hung limp from a crushed wrist. They didn't stop. They couldn't. Reed wasn't faster. He wasn't stronger, but he was more stubborn than death. And when the war chief lunged again, Reed stepped aside, not to dodge, but to break him. He wrapped both arms around the alien's waist, used his last burst of strength, and lifted. The relic's feet left the ground, and Reed slammed him down on the jagged rock edge. Something cracked. The war chief gasped. Reed landed on top of him, straddled his chest, and drove a punch into his face. Then another, then another. The alien's arms twitched, but didn't rise. And then he lay still. Silence. Then the relic guide stepped forward, knelt beside the body, and placed 2 fingers on the war chief's throat. No pulse. He looked at Reed. Then he dropped to one knee. Behind him, the other robed relics, half hidden in the rocks, did the same. Reed stood over the corpse, blood running down his chest, one eye nearly swollen shut. He looked at the crowd and said nothing. He didn't need to. They carried the war chief's body away in total silence. No anger, no protest. It was honor. Reed didn't walk back to camp. He limped. Every step was pain. His ribs might be broken, his knuckles raw, his left shoulder burned with fire. But when he reached Shelter Alpha, the crew was waiting. The Atroxy stepped forward. We watched the ridge, saw the torches go dark. You lived. I won, Reed croaked. You always do. The Gorali chuckled. I bet the relics won't be testing the shelter again anytime soon. Reed just leaned against the wall, breathing like an engine about to overheat. No, he said. Now they'll respect it. A week later, the relic sent another messenger. Not a warrior, a scribe. He brought a scroll, written in both relic and Denari script. It was a treaty. Short, simple. The canyon belongs to the shelter master and his crew. So long as they do not expand north, there will be peace. The relic will not interfere. They will watch, but they will not war. At the bottom, in blood and ash, was the war chief's sigil. Reed signed his name beneath it in chalk, like he always did. Nothing fancy, no title, just Reed. That was enough. In the months that followed, Shelter Alpha became legend. New crews came from orbit. They followed Reed's blueprints to the letter. No synthetic domes, no smart walls, just brute structure, manual systems, backup plans made with sweat and scars. And they worked. The relic watched from afar. Sometimes, one of them would come down and sit near the ridge, silent, watching Reed's team build, never interfering, just observing. Reed would nod at them once. They always nodded back. One night, under the stars, the Atroxy sat next to Reed near the ridge where it had all started. The wind was soft now. Just a breeze. Nothing like the one that had tried to kill them weeks ago. "You think this peace will last?" the alien asked. Reed didn't answer at first. Then he said, "No peace lasts forever." "So what do we do when it ends?" Reed took a swig from his flask, eyes never leaving the stars. "We build stronger shelters." The diplomatic shuttle arrived without warning. No pre-landing transmission, no clearance request. Just a clean descent over the canyon mouth and a silent, confident touchdown on a flat ridge above Shelter Alpha. The sleek Denari ship gleamed silver and blue, spotless despite the dust storms. It wasn't built for war or work. It was built to impress. Reed watched it land from the shelter roof, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I don't like this," the Atroxy technician muttered beside him. "You're not supposed to," Reed replied. He hadn't trusted the Council since the first day they called his bunker a pile of junk. And after everything, the sabotage, the relic attack, the blood spilled in the name of politics, he knew one thing for sure. The Council didn't like leaving loose ends, and Reed had become a very visible loose end. The envoy who stepped off the shuttle was all charm and fake sincerity. His name was Director Helven, and he looked like he'd never held a tool in his life. Slim, manicured, dressed in a flowing coat of reflective fabric that shimmered like water. Every movement was rehearsed, every smile calculated. He extended a hand. "Commander Reed." Reed didn't take it. "I'm not a commander." Helven chuckled like it was a joke. "Of course, modesty. I like that." Reed didn't laugh. "Say what you came to say." Helven nodded, pretending not to notice the cold welcome. He looked around at the shelters, strong, plain, scarred by storms and battles, but still standing. "You've done remarkable things here," Helven said. "Turned failure into success, fear into order. These shelters? They're inspiring confidence across the sector." Reed didn't answer. Helven turned, his smile never dropping. "Which brings us to our offer." Inside Shelter Alpha, they sat across from each other at the central table. Reed didn't bother offering refreshments. Helven placed a small holopad between them and tapped a projection into life. The screen displayed a bold title: Denari Authority Proposal, Planetary Oversight Appointment. Underneath, Proposed Governor, Reed, Human Male. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You want me to govern this planet?" Helven nodded. "We do. Your leadership is undeniable. You've earned the respect of alien species, brought order to chaos, survived a relic war chief, and proved human ingenuity under fire. That's the kind of figurehead we need. Strong, grounded, proven." Reed leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "So I go from unwanted contractor to poster boy?" Helven smiled. "From outsider to legacy." Reed stared at him. "What's the catch?" There was a pause. Then Helven tapped the holopad again, and another clause appeared. "All structural and territorial control to be transferred to Denari Command under executive jurisdiction. Shelter Alpha and all derivatives to become Council-managed properties." Reed's expression didn't change. "You want to take the shelters?" Not take, Helvin said gently. Manage. Distribute the knowledge sector wide. Turn your genius into a universal blueprint. You'll be remembered, respected, immortalized. Reed chuckled for the first time. But it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. You want to wear my skin, he said flatly. Prop me up, smile for the cameras, and then gut everything I built from the inside. Don't be so dramatic. Reed stood up. I built these shelters while your golden boys died in tents. I held off the relic while your inspectors sabotaged my equipment. And now that the world sees what I made, you want to steal it. Helvin stood too, his smile cracking for the first time. Careful, Mr. Reed. Pride can burn faster than wind and sand. You think this place will hold without the Council's protection? Without trade support? Fuel shipments? Food rations? Reed didn't blink. We'll make our own. You can't build an empire out of dirt and defiance. I don't want an empire. I want one thing, Helvin sneered. What's that? Reed leaned forward. A shelter no one can tear down. That night, Helvin left the canyon. No handshake, no deal, no diplomacy. He left a warning instead. 2 hours after the shuttle disappeared, a Denari relay went out across the sector. Shelter Alpha declared non-compliant, possible insurrection, authority pending reassignment. And just like that, Reed was an outlaw. The next day, supply shipments stopped. First, the water filters. Then, replacement filters and circuit panels. Then, the long-range communications network, shut down from orbit. No explanation. No courtesy. Reed and his crew were cut off. They're trying to squeeze us, the Atroxy said. Make us beg. They think we'll crack, the Akron added. Reed didn't speak. He was already sketching new blueprints on the shelter wall. Gravity siphons, sand filters, wind turbine enhancements. His hand didn't shake once. We don't beg, he said. We build. The first few days were rough. Without Council supply chains, they had to adapt fast. They broke down damaged tech for scrap, rerouted storm drains to harvest condensation, built a crude but working windmill to power auxiliary systems. Everyone worked, no one complained. Even the relic sent silent help, leaving bundles of dried fungus, desert herbs, and flint near the northern ridge. Gifts, tributes, proof that they saw Reed now as Canyon Master, not foreign invader. But the Council wasn't done. A week later, a dropship entered orbit under a fake mining ID. Reed saw it from the ridge, fast, dark, heavy with armament. Not a diplomat, a reclaimer unit. He knew what it meant. Helvan had lost the PR war. Now he wanted a quiet cleanup. One-night raid. No survivors, no witnesses. Reed gathered the crew in Shelter Alpha and spoke quietly, his voice carrying no panic, just clarity. They're coming to erase us. The room went still. We'll fight, the Ikran said. We'll hold the shelter, the Atroxy added. Reed shook his head. Number, we don't match them in firepower. Then what? Reed tapped the old pressure map on the wall. We do what the Council never understood. We survive. Smarter. Harder. More prepared. We bleed them dry by making them fight a shelter that knows how to fight back. That night, they rigged every hallway with traps, converted vent shafts into ambush points, flooded one corridor with coolant to freeze boots to the floor. The Atroxy rewired the power grid to fry any unauthorized access. And Reed? He built a final failsafe, a hidden kill switch buried deep under the shelter. One pull, and the whole ceiling would collapse on top of them and any invader. If the Council wanted the shelter, they'd have to take it in pieces. When the dropship came, it didn't land gently. It slammed into the canyon like a declaration of war. 30 black-armored soldiers poured out. Council's finest. No insignias, no questions, just orders to kill. But the shelter didn't welcome them. The main door was welded shut, reinforced twice over. The first breach team tried to cut through it, only to set off a flash-burst mine that blinded 3 and melted their cutter's arm. Then came the corridor collapse, crushing 2 under falling stone. They tried the roof, found only decoys and dead ends. Every corner they turned, they were hit by resistance. Not just bullets, planning, tactics. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting the shelter itself. And Reed? He was always 10 steps ahead. By dawn, half the team was dead. The rest retreated under smoke and screams. The dropship fled without its full crew, and the shelter still stood, scarred, but unbroken. The next day, Reed walked out into the sunlight, blood on his hands, fire in his bones. He stood on the canyon ridge and lit a flare. The signal was simple. Shelter Alpha holds. Across the sector, the footage leaked, recorded by hacked drones, posted on underground networks. A human had survived the impossible again, had defied the council, had bled for every inch of steel and stone. And people started listening. They didn't send more reclaimers. They didn't send more envoys, because they knew now Shelter Alpha wasn't just a bunker. It was a symbol, and Reed wasn't just a builder. He was a wall between survival and extinction. That night, the Atroxy sat beside him on the roof. "The council will wait. They'll watch. Maybe they'll even come again." Reed nodded. "They always come." "So what do we do?" Reed took a slow sip from his flask. "We make the shelter stronger." It was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from waiting. After the reclaimer unit failed, no other ships had approached the canyon. The council had gone dark. No threats, no messages, no demands. Reed had seen this before. In war. It was the silence before the second wave, when the enemy realized brute force wouldn't work and decided to get personal. That's when they send the people who smile when they stab you. So, when the long-range scanners picked up a civilian shuttle approaching low from orbit, no escorts, no weapons, just a soft ping and a landing request. Reed already knew what this was. He just didn't know who they'd send. Not yet. The shuttle landed a few kilometers out, just far enough to require a walk. Reed waited outside Shelter Alpha, boots planted, rifle on his back but not drawn. His crew stood inside behind the gate, watching through cracks in the reinforced steel. Tense, curious, ready for another fight. But this wasn't war, not in the usual sense. And when the figure came walking over the ridge, Reed felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, not anger, memory, the kind that clawed at you from inside your rib cage. It was a woman, mid-40s, lean, short brown hair, dressed in civilian gear, standard spacer's coat, dust-stained boots, and a weathered face that hadn't smiled in years. She stopped 10 paces from him. He didn't move. Her voice was hoarse, dry from the walk. "Hey, Reed." His lips didn't move, but his knuckles whitened slightly at his sides. Cora. Cora Hayes. She was the last person he ever thought he'd see again, because she was the one who'd left him behind on Zeta Prime. Literally. The crew didn't know what to make of her. Reed told them nothing. Just that she was off limits. No threats, no weapons, no questions. She stayed in a smaller supply shelter, separate from the main crew. Reed avoided her for 2 days, working through the heat, the plans, the traps, like nothing had changed. But inside? Inside, something had cracked open. He hadn't thought about Zeta Prime in years, didn't want to, didn't need to. But now here she was, sent by the council, alone. And she knew him too well to lie with a smile. On the 3rd night, she finally spoke. They sat on the roof of Shelter Alpha, staring out at the stars. The wind was soft, the silence heavy. "You built this place out of spite," she said. "No," Reed said. "I built it because no one else would." She snorted. Same difference. He didn't look at her. Why'd they send you? She hesitated. They thought I could get through to you, that I could convince you to come back, take the governor's seat, sign the papers. I already turned that down. I know. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. They're scared of you now, Reed. The image, the story, the shelters. You're a problem they didn't plan for. And the thing is, she glanced at him. They don't want to kill you anymore. They want to own you. He said nothing. They think I'm the key. Pull out the last splinter in your heart. Use it to crack you open. Still nothing. But the thing they forgot, she said, voice dropping. You were never broken. You just learned how to survive without letting anyone in again. He turned toward her then, eyes like ash. You left me to die. She flinched, but didn't look away. You know I didn't have a choice. They all had choices. You had mine. She sighed. We were outnumbered. You were bleeding out. Command said evac had to move. Don't feed me that official crap, Cora. You could have held that shuttle 2 more minutes. That's all it would have taken. She didn't respond, just looked down at her hands. I almost didn't make it off that rock, Reed continued. But that's the thing. I did. I survived. I know. And every day after that, I remembered one thing. The people in charge will always sell you out when it's inconvenient. She blinked, hard. That's why you won't join them now. He nodded. Because I built something without them. I gave people something that doesn't fall down when the wind screams. They sat in silence for a while. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. She held it out to him. What is it? A kill switch, she said softly. Encrypted by Council command. If you activate it, every record of Shelter Alpha gets deleted from the Denari archives. They'll write it off as a lost site. No more reclamation orders. No more diplomatic pressure. Reed stared at it. What's the catch? You never build another one again, she said. You come back. You sign the governor contract. Let them parade you around. Let them spin the myth however they want. Reed laughed. Cold. So trade my soul for silence. She nodded. That's the deal. He looked down at the device in her palm. Then he looked back toward the shelter behind him, where his crew was sleeping, where the walls he'd bled for still stood tall and proud, where the relic left offerings now instead of blood. And he said, no deal. That night, Cora left. No anger, no final words, just one look, long and tired before she disappeared over the ridge and back into the black. Reed didn't watch her go. He didn't need to. She wasn't the storm anymore. He was. 3 months passed. The Council never sent another envoy. They didn't try another attack. Because now they understood. Reed didn't run from storms. He became one. The shelters grew. Not in size, but in purpose. Others came. Engineers, soldiers, wanderers, not looking for paradise, but looking for truth, for structure that held when everything else collapsed. Reed taught them all how to build, how to defend, how to stand. And when asked what the secret was, he gave the same answer every time. Build it ugly, build it strong, build it to outlive you. One evening, years later, the Atroxy stood beside him on the same ridge. The wind was softer now. The planet had changed. Ever regret it? The Atroxy asked. What? Not leaving. Not taking the deal. Reed smiled faintly. I didn't want to be a name. I wanted to build something that didn't need me. The Atroxy nodded. I think you did. Reed looked out across the canyon, where 4 more shelters now stood, made by new hands, but with his bones buried deep in their foundation. He exhaled. You hear that? The Atroxy tilted his head. Hear what? Reed smiled wider. The wind's not screaming anymore. The world didn't end with fire or screams. It ended with silence. Grant Hale stood on the roof of a ruined skyscraper in what used to be New Chicago, watching the dead sky. No satellites moved. No aircraft streaked across the horizon. The once glittering network of humanity's chatter, billions of voices bouncing across the globe, was gone. Earth had gone dark, silent as a graveyard. For the first time in recorded history, not a single human broadcast was moving through the void. To the galaxy watching from afar, that silence meant one thing. Humanity had finally been crushed. Grant knew better. The air carried the sour smell of ash and rust. Buildings sagged like tired corpses, their windows shattered, their steel frames bent from orbital strikes. The aliens had come with precision, erasing communication hubs first, then power grids, then the sprawling cities that once defined humanity's arrogance. They wanted Earth broken, but not gone. They wanted proof that their empire had stamped out the problem of mankind. But they had made one mistake. They hadn't killed everyone. Grant tightened his grip on the rifle strapped across his back, the weapon a Frankenstein of salvaged alien parts and old human engineering. His gloves were burned through at the fingers, and his hands were scarred from months of scavenging wreckage and fighting like a rat in the ruins. His mind drifted back to the night it all went silent. He had been in a military outpost when the sky lit up with burning streaks, like the stars themselves were falling. Entire command chains vanished in minutes. The Earth's defense grid, something humanity believed would make them untouchable, folded like paper. His brother Marcus had been manning the comms. He never made it out. The last words Grant heard before the console burned him alive were, "They don't want to kill us all. They want us to watch." Now, the galaxy believed Earth was finished. The transmissions of laughter, war, music, even humanity's endless arguments had gone quiet. And across the stars, the other races would breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the wild, unpredictable species of Earth had finally been erased. But silence wasn't surrender. It was the sound of teeth being bared in the dark. Grant crouched as a low hum rippled in the distance. Alien drones, slick silver predators shaped like wasps, scoured the ruins. He had learned how to stay beneath their sensors, move slow, control your breath, become part of the wreckage. The first time he saw them sweep an area, they torched 20 survivors who tried to run. He had dragged himself through the corpses afterward, vowing he'd never give the enemy the satisfaction of his panic. He slithered into a collapsed subway tunnel, where faint torchlight glowed ahead. Inside, a cluster of gaunt men huddled around a rusted generator. Their eyes flicked up as Grant entered, but no one spoke until he dropped a sack of stolen alien rations at their feet. "You did it?" one of them whispered, voice hoarse. Grant nodded once. "Drone patrol went down over the river, pulled what I could before they came looking." The men tore open the sack like wolves, devouring the pale meat inside. One of them, an old soldier with half his jaw missing, muttered through broken teeth, "They think we're finished." That's what they want the stars to believe. Grant sat down, leaning his rifle against the wall. His throat was dry, but his voice was steady. "Let them think it. Let the whole galaxy breathe easy. They don't understand what's coming." The old soldier's eyes glistened. "And what is coming, Hale?" Grant stared into the darkness of the tunnel, hearing the faint buzz of alien craft above, the world still under their boot. He thought of his brother's final words, of the silence that now blanketed Earth. "Annihilation," Grant said softly. "Not ours, theirs. They killed the wrong species." No one argued. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was a shared oath, unspoken but heavy in the air. Above them, the galaxy believed Earth was just another conquered world. But beneath the ashes, men like Grant Hale were waiting, sharpening their rage into something the stars had never faced before. And when Earth finally broke its silence, the sound would be war. Grant woke to the metallic hum of the generator sputtering out its last breath. The stale air in the tunnel pressed against his chest as he sat up, his rifle still strapped across him like a second spine. He didn't need to check. He knew the generator had failed again. The dim orange glow it had fed into the subway chamber had died in the night, leaving only shadows and the smell of oil. He rose quietly, careful not to step on the huddled bodies sleeping on the concrete floor. Men who had once been engineers, farmers, construction workers, now just bones wrapped in rags. Every face carried the same hollow eyes, a mixture of hunger, rage, and the kind of grief that never found words. Grant climbed a cracked stairwell and peered out through a collapsed entryway where daylight leaked through. The city above stretched in silence, towers like broken teeth, smoke plumes still twisting from distant impacts. The aliens hadn't bothered to clean up their mess. They didn't need to. The thought burned in him like acid. They had reduced Earth to silence, yes, but silence was a mask. Beneath it, the rage of men who had lost everything was sharpening into a weapon. He pulled a small receiver from his pack, a crude box of wires and plates cobbled together from military scraps. He turned the dial slowly, waiting for even a crackle of signal. Nothing. Just dead air. For months he had scanned the spectrum, listening to the void where human voices used to be. The aliens had erased every frequency, every satellite, every system. But he didn't believe for a second that humanity had died everywhere. "Anything?" a voice rasped behind him. Grant didn't flinch. He recognized the old soldier, Kieran, his jaw still bandaged in dirty cloth. He had climbed the stairs like a ghost, rifle dragging behind him. "Nothing yet," Grant said. Kieran leaned on the wall, coughing into his sleeve. "You ever wonder if maybe it really is over? Maybe there's no one left to hear us?" Grant's hand tightened on the receiver. "Number, they'll hear us. And when they do, the whole galaxy will regret what happened here." The old man's eyes studied him in silence. Then a grim smile tugged at the corner of his ruined mouth. "You sound like a fool, Hale, but a dangerous one. That's what we need." By midday, the survivors had gathered. There were fewer than 40 of them now. They sat in the circle of dim firelight, gaunt faces watching Grant as he laid out maps scavenged from a burned-out command post. The paper was charred on the edges, but the ink still showed the layout of the city and the locations of known alien patrol zones. "They control the skies. They control the orbital lanes. They've got machines sweeping every district," Grant said, his voice steady, though his body screamed with exhaustion. "But they're lazy, arrogant. They think we're finished, so they've thinned their patrols. I've watched them long enough to see their gaps." He marked an X on the map with a piece of charcoal. "Here, supply depot. Alien tech guarded by drones. If we take it, we get food, power cells, and maybe more weapons." Murmurs rippled through the group. One of the younger men shook his head. "We're 40 against machines that can vaporize us. That's suicide." Grant met his gaze without flinching. "It's suicide if we stay here too. You think they'll let us rot forever? Number, they'll finish the job when it suits them. The only chance we have is to hit back, make them bleed, and remind them who they're dealing with." Kieran's gravel voice cut through the doubt. "The boy's right. Death's coming either way. Might as well meet it swinging." The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was acceptance. Every man there had already lost his family, his home, his life. The only thing left was revenge. Grant saw it in their eyes, that spark. Not hope, not really, but something darker, something stronger. "Then it's decided," Grant said. "We strike tomorrow night." While they planned in the ruins of New Chicago, the galaxy watched Earth's silence from afar. On the neutral trade worlds, rumors spread like wildfire. The humans had finally been exterminated. News feeds broadcast hollows of Earth's burning cities, replayed footage of orbital strikes, and analysts spoke with smug certainty. Humanity, they said, had always been too reckless, too chaotic, too violent. It was inevitable they would meet their end against a disciplined empire. Across alien council chambers, leaders congratulated themselves. The threat was gone. The unpredictable species that had turned every battlefield into a slaughterhouse, that had defied every diplomatic prediction, that had clawed its way into the stars with grit instead of grace, finally silenced. But in the darker corners of the galaxy, whispers grew. Some races remembered what humans had done in the wars before. They remembered colonies that fought until every last man, woman, and child was dead rather than surrender. They remembered human soldiers who bit through their own tongues to spit blood in their captors' faces. They remembered the one truth that history had proven over and over again. Silence never meant defeat when it came to mankind. That night, as the survivors prepared their weapons, Grant sat apart, staring at the cracked ceiling of the tunnel. His rifle rested across his lap, his hands tracing the scratches in the metal. Each one told a story. A fight survived, an enemy killed, a step deeper into hell. He thought of Marcus again. His brother's face burned into his memory, his voice echoing with that last warning. "They don't want to kill us all. They want us to watch." But Marcus was wrong. They had killed enough to awaken something far worse. Grant closed his eyes and whispered into the silence, as if speaking to the galaxy itself. "You should have left us alone." The next day, when the alien drones swept over the ruined city, their scanners registered no unusual movement. Just silence, just ruins, just a dead world. And beneath that silence, men sharpened their knives and loaded their rifles, ready to show the universe what annihilation really looked like. The night bled across the ruins, black and heavy, the kind of night where shadows swallowed men whole. Grant crouched at the edge of a shattered overpass, his breath steady, as his eyes scanned the depot below. Alien lights glowed cold and pale, casting long streaks across the cracked concrete. Sleek silver crates were stacked in geometric precision, each one humming faintly with energy. Above, 2 drones patrolled in lazy arcs, their wings slicing the air with a high-pitched whine. He held up a clenched fist. The men behind him froze. 40 had dwindled to 35. Disease and hunger had stripped them further before they could even strike. Now those 35 clung to rifles, blades, and whatever courage starvation hadn't stolen. Grant's jaw tightened. He knew most wouldn't see the dawn. But this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about making the galaxy remember Earth. Kieran slid up beside him, jaw still wrapped in filthy cloth, rifle slung across his crooked shoulder. His one good eye reflected the depot's glow. "Drones'll spot us the second we fire," he muttered. "That's fine," Grant said. His voice was iron. "We're not hiding tonight." He checked his rifle. Scratched. Human steel patched with stolen alien parts. A beast as broken and brutal as its wielder. He slid a crude power cell into the chamber until it clicked. Around him, the men did the same. Grant raised 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They moved. The first explosion shattered the silence. A homemade charge detonated against the outer wall, showering sparks and metal. Alarms shrieked in alien tongues as drones whipped through the air, their red sensors flashing. Grant fired before the first beam of plasma cut across the night, his shot ripping through a drone's core and sending it spiraling into the dirt. "Move!" he roared, his voice raw against the storm of gunfire. Men poured into the depot like a flood of ghosts, rifles barking, grenades clattering against the polished crates. Plasma streaks scorched the ground, slicing through human flesh, turning screams into echoes that vanished into smoke. But they didn't falter. Every man who fell dragged another shot from his brothers, rage drowning fear. Grant ducked behind a crate, metal searing his back as a beam tore past. He yanked a grenade from his vest, pulled the pin with his teeth, and hurled it into a cluster of drones. The blast ripped them apart, alien parts raining like metal hail. He surged forward, rifle spitting fire, until his boots kicked through glowing circuitry. He saw a young man crumple beside him, chest opened by plasma, his eyes wide in shock. Grant didn't stop. He stepped over the body and kept firing, his mind locked on the objective. Supplies. By the time they breached the central stack, the depot was burning. Alien screams cut through the smoke, guards, tall and armored, wielding blades that shimmered with unnatural light. Grant met one head-on, his rifle empty. He swung it like a club, the stock cracking against the alien's helmet. The creature staggered, hissing. Grant drove a knife up under its armor and twisted until the body fell twitching at his feet. Kieran appeared from the haze, dragging 2 crates by sheer will. His bandaged jaw leaked blood from a fresh wound, but his one good eye burned. "Food and cells," he rasped. Grant nodded once, firing into the smoke behind him. "Get them out, now!" The men rallied, grabbing crates, dragging them toward the shattered wall. Plasma fire followed, but for every man who fell, another heaved a box onto his back and kept moving. Grant stayed last, covering the retreat, his rifle blazing until it clicked empty. He drew his knife again, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the depot they were leaving in flames. The galaxy had believed Earth silent. Now its silence was broken by fire. He turned and ran, lungs burning, following the trail of his men into the ruins. Behind him, the depot roared, explosions tearing the night apart. They didn't stop until they reached the subway tunnels, each man collapsing where he stood, crates piled in, the dark like treasure. Blood soaked the concrete. 25 had returned. 10 were gone. Grant dropped to his knees, chest heaving. His hands shook as he reloaded, even though no enemy followed. Around him, men tore into the crates, ration packs of pale alien meat, canisters of glowing energy, strange weapons they didn't yet understand. For the first time in months, they had more than scraps. Kieran slumped against the wall, his bandages soaked crimson. He spat blood into the dirt, then gave a broken laugh. "They'll notice that. Whole damn galaxy will notice." Grant leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the taste of smoke and blood still in his throat. He saw Marcus's face again, the way his brother's hands had burned as the console fried him alive. He saw the moment Earth went silent. Good, he thought bitterly. Let the galaxy watch. Let them whisper. Let them feel the first edge of the storm. He stood, towering over the men, his voice sharp as steel. "Tonight, we proved Earth isn't dead, but this isn't enough. We're going to hit them again and again until the galaxy knows what silence really means." The men looked up at him, their faces smeared with blood and ash, their eyes hollow but burning. And in that moment, Earth's silence had turned into something else. A promise. In the outer colonies, alien fleets would soon see the reports. One of their depots on Earth burned to the ground. Dozens of drones destroyed, guards slaughtered, supplies stolen. The galaxy would laugh at first. They would call it desperation, a fluke, the last gasps of a dying world. But Grant knew better. This was just the beginning. Earth's silence was over. The alien council chamber glittered with crystalline walls, its floor polished so perfectly it reflected the faces of the gathered leaders. Holoscreens flickered above the round table, replaying shaky drone footage of the raid. Fire streaking across the depot, drones bursting in midair, and men, starved, ragged, filthy, charging through the smoke like wolves. The footage ended with the depot exploding, flames devouring the feed. The chamber went silent. "They were supposed to be finished," one counselor hissed, its long fingers curling into the table. Its voice was sharp, its words dripping disdain. "Earth was silenced. We struck their cities, their fleets. They had nothing left." Another counselor, scaled and broad, leaned forward. "Yet they burn our depots. They kill our drones. Those animals still breathe." The presiding commander, draped in ceremonial armor, raised a hand. His voice was calm but cold. This was not a battle. This was desperation. What you saw was the death throes of a defeated species. They cannot rise. Their silence remains. But in the back of the chamber, one old strategist, scarred from wars centuries past, shook his head. His voice cut across the room like gravel. "Number, you misread them. Silence is never death for humans. It is teeth sharpening in the dark. If they are striking depots now, it means they are not broken. It means they are preparing." The others dismissed him, but unease hung in the chamber. Back on Earth, Grant sat by the glow of a stolen power cell, his rifle resting across his knees. Around him, the survivors gnawed on alien rations, their bodies too starved to savor it. The crates from the raid had given them food and power for weeks. But the real prize sat in the corner of the tunnel, alien weapons, their surfaces slick and humming with strange energy. One of the younger men, hollow-cheeked and wild-eyed, tapped one nervously. "We don't even know how to use these. What if they blow our arms off?" Grant's voice was low, but it carried through the chamber. "Then we learn. We don't have a choice." He picked up one of the alien rifles, the metal cold and unnatural in his hands. He studied it the way a wolf studies a new kill, curious, cautious, already claiming it as his own. The men watched as he aimed into the tunnel wall and squeezed the trigger. A bolt of pale light seared into the concrete, sending shards flying. The men flinched, then stared at the smoking crater in silence. Grant lowered the weapon. "We'll figure out the rest." Kieran chuckled, a broken rasp. "God help the bastards when we do." Over the next days, the subway tunnels echoed with the crack of gunfire, the hiss of alien rifles, and the curses of men burning their fingers on strange power cells. They trained in the darkness, fumbling at first, then growing sharper, faster, meaner. Every mistake was punished, every hesitation mocked, every weakness beaten out. Grant drove them hard, harder than any drill sergeant had in the old armies. "You want revenge? Earn it. You want your family's killers to bleed? Earn it. You want to stop dying like cattle? Then stand up and learn to fight like men again." He tore them apart and rebuilt them. Starved farmers became riflemen. Broken workers learned to throw grenades with precision. Old men with shaking hands steadied them until they could slit throats in silence. They weren't an army. Not yet. But they were becoming something far more dangerous. Survivors. Wolves. Word of the raid spread beyond Earth. On outer mining colonies, traders whispered of humans rising from their ashes. On neutral worlds, smugglers bet credits on how long it would take for Earth's silence to erupt into war. Some laughed, others shivered. And on one distant planet, a young alien soldier stared at the reports and muttered under his breath, "They'll come for us. I've seen their kind before." But his commander silenced him with a backhand and spat. "Humans are done." Their silence is proof. One night, as the survivors cleaned their weapons, Grant climbed back to the ruined overpass where he had first scouted the depot. The wind carried smoke from the city, and the stars blinked cold above. He remembered how those stars had once carried humanity's voice. Songs, wars, laughter, rage, and now carried nothing. He clenched his fists, the scars on his knuckles pulling tight. Not nothing, he thought. Not silence. Not anymore. The galaxy believed Earth was a grave. He would make it a trap. The next morning he addressed the men. 35 faces stared at him, gaunt but burning with something new. "We hit a depot," he said, pacing slowly, voice sharp as a blade. "That was the first cut. The galaxy will laugh. They'll say we're desperate, broken, doomed. Let them laugh. That laughter will choke them when we hit again, and again, and again." He stopped, his eyes scanning each man. "We're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to remind the stars who we are. The day Earth went silent, they thought annihilation was coming for us. They were wrong." His voice dropped to a growl. "Annihilation is coming for them." The men roared, not loud, not joyous, but a guttural, feral sound that shook the tunnel walls. It wasn't the cheer of soldiers. It was the growl of predators. Grant felt it in his bones. The silence of Earth was gone. The hunt had begun. The first warning came in the form of silence. Grant woke to the absence of the generator's hum, not the usual sputtering or coughing fit, but dead silence. He sat up instantly, rifle already in his hands, instincts screaming. Around him, the men stirred uneasily in the dim glow of power cells, their faces sharp with hunger and exhaustion. Then came the sound, a low thrum that rattled the walls, distant but growing. "They're coming," Kieran rasped, his good eye narrowing as he shoved rounds into his rifle. Grant didn't answer. He knew what that sound meant. Drones were one thing, but this was heavier. Dropships. The tunnel shook as something massive roared overhead. Dust rained from the ceiling. Men scrambled to their feet, some panicking, some steadying themselves with clenched jaws. "Positions!" Grant barked. His voice cut through the fear like a blade. "We knew this day would come. Hold the line." The first blast collapsed the tunnel mouth, fire and concrete ripping through the darkness. Men screamed as shrapnel tore into them. Through the smoke came the drones, dozens of them, their wings shrieking like predators. Behind them, armored soldiers dropped in silence, their tall frames glowing faintly in the firelight, blades and rifles in their hands. Grant opened fire, the alien rifle kicking against his shoulder as bolts of pale energy cut into the enemy. One drone fell, then another, crashing in sparks. Around him, his men roared as they fought, the air filling with thunder, gunfire, plasma, screams. A young man fell at Grant's side, his chest opened by a drone's beam. Grant kicked the corpse aside and kept firing, his mind narrowing to one truth: kill as many as possible before the line broke. The tunnel became a slaughterhouse. Plasma beams carved through stone, grenades tore through clusters of men and machines, the walls dripping with fire and blood. Grant fought like a man already dead, his knife and rifle moving as one. He stabbed an alien soldier through the throat, ripped the weapon from its hands, and turned it on another. "Kieran!" he roared over the chaos. "I'm here!" came the rasp. The old soldier was on one knee, one arm useless, but still firing into the swarm with steady aim. The survivors rallied around him, their desperation turning into savagery. Every man fought like the end had already come, dragging enemies down even as they bled out. They didn't fight for life. They fought for vengeance. And then, as suddenly as it began, the enemy pulled back. The drones retreated through the smoke. The alien soldiers vanished into the darkness, leaving behind shattered bodies and burning wreckage. The survivors panted in the silence, their rifles still raised, their eyes wide with disbelief. Grant staggered forward, blood soaking his sleeve, his lungs burning with smoke. He saw the bodies of his men, too many to count, strewn across the floor. Kieran leaned against the wall, coughing blood, but still alive. "They could have finished us," Kieran rasped. His voice was suspicion, not relief. "Why didn't they?" Grant's jaw tightened. He knew the answer before he spoke. "They're testing us. They want to see how long we'll last." He spat into the dirt, his blood mixing with the dust. "Fine. Let them watch. Let the galaxy watch. Every drop they spill makes us stronger." Above Earth, the alien fleet hovered in orbit, silent and watchful. Reports streamed across their channels. Heavy resistance, higher casualties than predicted, humans refusing to break. The commanders debated furiously. "Exterminate them," one demanded. "Level the planet." "No," said another. "The silence must remain. If we wipe them completely, the galaxy will see. Let them fade into the dark. Let their deaths be slow." The old strategist who had spoken before leaned forward, his voice cold. "You are fools. Every breath you allow them, every second you leave them alive, you forge a weapon you cannot contain." His warning was ignored. Orders went out. The fleet would tighten its grip, starve the humans, bleed them, but never finish them. Not yet. In the tunnels, the survivors buried their dead in shallow pits, marking graves with broken rifles. 25 had fallen, 15 remained. Grant stood over the graves, his fists clenched, his body shaking with exhaustion. He looked at the men still alive, bloodied, broken, hollow, but their eyes burned brighter than ever. "They think we'll break," he said quietly, his voice raw. "They think if they squeeze hard enough, we'll vanish into silence again. They're wrong. They don't understand what they've done." He lifted his rifle, holding it high above the graves. "They've turned Earth into a forge, and we are the fire." The men answered with a growl, deep and guttural, the sound of predators. Grant knew then what the aliens had never understood. Annihilation wasn't coming for humanity. Humanity was annihilation. Across the galaxy, whispers spread faster than light. The humans were not dead. Their silence was not surrender. Reports of raids, ambushes, and battles trickled out. Some scoffed, others trembled, and on one mining colony, a smuggler raised his glass and said, "Mark my words, Earth isn't silent, Earth is hunting." The depot raid had been a statement. The counterattack had been a warning. But now Grant knew staying underground meant nothing but a slow death. He stood in the tunnel chamber, maps and alien crates spread before him, the last 15 men gathered around. Their faces were gaunt, eyes shadowed, bodies patched with scars and bandages. They were half dead already, but their silence was gone. Their eyes burned like coals. Grant laid a blackened finger on the map. "We've been rats in their ruins long enough. The fleet's still above us, watching, waiting for us to starve. We're not going to give them the pleasure." He looked up at the men. "We're going to take one of their ships." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of a stolen power cell. One of the younger men, barely more than a boy, shook his head. "We can't fly those things. We don't even know how they work." Grant's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. We've been figuring it out since the day the sky burned. If we can bleed them, we can fly them." Kieran coughed, blood flecking his ragged bandages. His one good eye locked on Grant. "Where?" Grant dragged the charcoal across the map, marking a spot near the shattered edge of the city. "Landing zone. They use it for short-range dropships. Smaller craft, easier to steal. Lightly guarded if we move fast." Kieran gave a rasping laugh. "Lightly guarded," he says. But no one argued. They knew there was no other path left. That night, under a moon choked by ash, they moved. The landing zone squatted in the ruins like a wound. Alien towers of black steel, their surfaces glowing faintly, surrounded by a perimeter of drones and soldiers. In its center sat the prize. 3 dropships, sleek and silver, their wings folded like waiting predators. Grant crouched in the rubble, his rifle steady in his hands, his eyes locked on the ships. The men waited behind him, clutching their weapons like lifelines. "This isn't about escape," Grant whispered. "It's about telling the galaxy. We're not done. If we get one of those ships, every world will know Earth still breathes. If we die loud enough that the stars hear us." He raised his hand. 3 fingers, 2, 1. The night erupted. The first shots ripped through the drones, their sensors flashing red before they crashed in sparks. Men screamed war cries that shook the ruins, grenades sailing into the perimeter. Alien soldiers rushed forward, blades gleaming, rifles spitting light. Grant charged straight into them. His rifle roared, cutting one soldier down, then another. When the weapon clicked empty, he swung it like a club, smashing into armor, stabbing with his knife until the ground was slick with alien blood. "Push forward," he bellowed. The men surged with him, desperation turning into savagery. Plasma tore through human flesh, but no one stopped. They fought like wolves, dragging enemies down, biting, clawing, stabbing with broken blades. The dropships loomed closer. Kieran limped beside Grant, firing with one arm, his face a mask of blood and fury. A plasma bolt caught him in the chest, knocking him to the ground. He gasped, blood bubbling at his lips, but his eye still burned. "Go," he rasped. "Take it. Make them pay." Grant knelt for a second, gripping the old man's shoulder. He saw not weakness, not defeat, but the same fire that had carried them this far. "I'll make them choke on your name," Grant swore. Then he rose and ran. The ramp of the nearest dropship hissed open, alien pilots spilling out with weapons raised. Grant cut them down with stolen fire, his body moving on fury alone. He stormed up the ramp, boots slick with blood, and into the cockpit. The alien controls glowed with strange symbols, pulsing softly. He didn't understand them. But he remembered Marcus, his brother's voice on the comms, his fingers flying across consoles with instinct. His words burned into Grant's mind. "Machines are just puzzles, Grant. Break them, bend them, or make them sing." Grant slammed his hands onto the controls, dragging levers, smashing buttons, listening to the hum of the engines. The ship groaned, lights flickering. Then a deep vibration shook the floor. Outside, the survivors, still standing, fought tooth and nail, holding back the tide. The dropship shuddered. Then it lifted. The ground fell away, fire and wreckage shrinking beneath. The surviving men inside screamed with a